Of strength, who bless the ones before us.
Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom, L'Shalom. V'hamidenu Malkeinu Uvos aleinu sukat shlomecha, Uvos aleinu sukat shlomecha.
In the rising of the sun, we remember. In the blowing of the wind, we remember. In the opening of buds, we remember. We remember. When we're weary and need strength, we remember. When we're lost and sick at heart, we remember. When we've joys we yearn to share, we remember. We remember. So long as we live, they too shall live. They are now a part of us. They are now a part of us. As we remember, we remember. We remember. We remember.
buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. They'll be singing, they'll be singing, they'll be singing over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Ilu natan natan danu natan danu et hashabat natan danu et hashabat dayenu day dayenu day dayenu day dayenu 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 day dayenu day dayenu day dayenu dayenu dayenu. Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Shabbat Shalom and almost Chag Sameach. We are just hours away from Passover beginning. It is wonderful to be here with you, with everybody who has joined us from our community in our Zoom room, from everybody who is joining us in our community on Facebook and our other live streaming platforms. Shabbat Shalom to you all. I am Rabbi Sarah Berman, and it is my distinct pleasure to join our cantorial intern, Jenna McMillan, this morning for our service. If you would like to follow along with our service and with our text study a little bit later on, please visit centralsynagogue.org/livestream and go to the Mishkan for our order of service and text study. I believe that if you are joining us on Facebook, there is a link already posted in the chat. It is a holiday of freedom that begins tonight. So of course it makes us think about what freedom means to us and how we put ourselves in a place where we are able to create our own freedom and create freedom for others. This is a theme that we'll return to through our service, so please keep it in mind. And if you would like to, and you're joining us on Facebook, if you'd like to share in the chat what freedom means to you, now is a moment where I invite you to do that. We continue our service with our morning prayers of praise, Matovu. If you are using our Mishkan Tefillah prayer book, there's also a link on centralsynagogue.org/livestream. Matovu is on page 74.
We say the words of Elohai Neshama every morning, breathing life into us and thanking God for giving us a pure soul. Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Ve'ata, 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 yitzarta, ve'ata, nefachta, nefachta bi. Ve'ata, mishamra, ve'ata, mishamra, ve'ata, mishamra, mishamra bikirbi. Elohai. Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Elohai, Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi Tehorahi, Tehorahi. We continue with the responsive chanting of our daily miracles. On page,
80.
there we go.
And I invite our congregation, our community, to join me in the responses.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Yisrael with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen. We sing our praises to God with the words of Ashrei on page 97. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, od yehalelucha selah. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, od yehalelucha selah. Ashrei, Ashrei, Ashrei yoshvei beitecha. now rise in body or in spirit for our call to worship. Page 108.
If you stood for Baruch Hu, I invite you to take a seat again. In this moment where we think about the wonders of creation and of all that God has created, we get to focus in on three of those things. We could focus in on light that God has created, on love that God has created, and on Torah that God has created as a way of showing God's love for us. I'll read to you from a meditation on God's love and Torah, actually from our High Holy Days prayer book from Mishkan HaNefesh. Love beyond all space and time, your love enfolds your people Yisrael. We receive it in your teaching, your gift of Torah, sacred obligations, discipline, and law. So let us speak these teachings when we lie down and rise up, and find joy forever in your Torah and mitzvot. They are the very essence of our life, ours to ponder and study all our days. May we never lose or be unworthy of your love.
וקרבתנו לשמך הקדוש, סלע באמת, להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
On this, our holiday of freedom, I ask you to begin thinking about what freedom means to you. If you're joining us on Facebook, I hope you will continue to add those thoughts to the chat. But for those who are in our Zoom room, this is a moment that I would love for you to unmute yourselves and share what freedom means to you and what ways you bring freedom for yourself into the world and freedom for others into the world. Paula, I wonder if you have an answer.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about that, and it's been an amazing year in limitation and seemingly feeling trapped without freedoms in so many ways. And yet it's also been a year of awakening of the total critical need for freedom, between Black Lives Matter and what's happening with Asians, and all of these things are combining to, I think, give us a new understanding of freedom. And it's really built in, if everybody isn't free, I'm not free, no matter what. And it's this incredible shared global experience that I think allowed that to happen.
Yeah. Wow. Monica, I wonder if you have an answer.
A hard one right now. I mean, I think after watching the legislation pass in Georgia a couple nights ago, I wonder where our freedom really lies. And I've never really wondered that before. And that's been a big question in my life because my parents are Holocaust survivors. So I hope that we're going to come together and fight together for all this legislation that's stopping people's ability potentially to vote. But I'm definitely scared. So the question of freedom means something very different this Passover, I think, and something that we should all discuss at our Seders.
And Karen on our Facebook feed talks about a freedom from pain and suffering for all people is the meaning of freedom for her. Wonder if there's anybody else in. Alyssa, would you like to?
Okay, this is a little scary for me to do, but as you know, Rabbi Berman, I write really bad free-form poetry.
I wouldn't call it bad at all.
Okay, thank you. When the mood strikes, and a week or two ago, I wrote a poem called Free, which I won't inflict the whole thing on you, but I'll perhaps read the last couple of verses. Is that okay?
Please.
Freedom to be in this moment without a thought for the next, or for the shoulds, coulds, woulds, and if onlys, without anger, without agitation, without rancor, with peace, quiet, stillness, and maybe, just maybe, a small portion, a modicum of love.
I hope that freedom this year, from this Passover to next Passover, brings us all that modicum or more of love. Alyssa, thank you. And Claudia on our Facebook feed suggests the opposite of slavery in all aspects. And I might suggest that is in our personal aspect, in our mental aspect, in our relational aspect, and in the ways that we see and treat other people in this world. So with all of these versions of freedom in mind, we turn to our prayer and our gratitude for the freedom that our people experienced at the shores of the sea, crossing from slavery to freedom. Mi Chamocha is on page 122.
Who is like you? Adonai. Who is like you? Adonai. Mi chamocha v'elim Adonai. Mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh. ma בעזרת ישראל, ובדחנו מך, יהודה וישראל. גואלנו, אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. We rise now for the tefillah. Adonai sfatai tiftach, Adonai sfatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha, ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai sfatai tiftach, Adonai sfatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha, ufi yagid tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Konei Hakol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot ve'Imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכה לחיים וחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חורים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך? מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני, אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. יהיו לרצון רפי, והיו ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי, אדוני
We turn next to our moment, our encounter with Torah for the week. And though we don't have a Torah before us, our wonderful friend and leader, Jenna McMillan, has agreed to chant some verses for us to bring us into our text study. So if you have your Siddur, your prayer book handy, please join me for the prayer for Torah study, which is on page 86, before we hear some verses of Torah from Jenna. The verses that she'll be chanting are Leviticus chapter 8, verses 26 through 28. These are the first three verses on the text study sheet, which appears on the second page of our order of service. And we bless for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
ויקח את החילב ואת העלייה ואת כוח הלב אשר על הקרב, ואת יותרת הכבד, ואת שתי הכליות, ואת חלביהן, ואת שוק הימין. ומסל המצות אשר לפני אדוני, לקח חלת מצה אחת, וחלת לחם שמן אחת, ורקיק אחד, וישם על החלבים ועל שוק הימין. ויתן את הכל על כפי אהרון ועל כפי בניו, וינף אותם תנופה לפני אדוני.
Thank you, Jenna. And to understand exactly what Jenna just chanted for us and the couple of verses that come later in this parasha, I wonder if, Susan, I wonder if you have the text study handy and might read aloud. And if you, there we go, great.
Yes, okay.
Great.
Okay. From the basket of unleavened breads, matzot, that was before Adonai, Moses took 1 cake of unleavened bread, matzah, 1 cake of oil bread, and 1 wafer, and placed them on the fat parts and on the right thigh. He placed all these on the palms of Aaron and on the palms of his sons, and elevated them as an elevation offering before Adonai. Then Moses took them from their hands and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. This was an ordination offering for a pleasing odor. It was an offering by fire to Adonai. And what is left over of the flesh and the bread you shall consume in fire. You shall not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the day that your period of ordination is completed, for your ordination will require 7 days.
So this is a use of matzah that may be unfamiliar to us. But of course, one of the names for Passover is Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzah or matzahs, of the unleavened breads. So when we look at this use of matzah, this first really use of matzah in a ritual context, it is in order to turn Aaron and his sons from regular people into priests. So what is the role of matzah in this ritual? Why do you think unleavened bread might be important in this moment? If you're on Facebook, I hope you will add some answers to the chat. And if you're joining us in our Zoom room, I hope you will unmute yourself and share an answer. What role does matzah play in this ritual? And why might matzah be important in this moment?
It seems to be like the linking of Aaron to God through the sacrifice of matzah and Aaron's sons.
Exactly.
And that the matzah, signifies everything it does for us in Passover, that it, are fleeing for freedom, and somehow linking that experience with making Aaron and his sons priests.
Yeah. They are lifting it up to God in their hands. And then it is burnt, because the way that we get our sacrifices to God in the ancient world was to burn it, because it was the scent, it was the smoke that would ascend to God's very presence. So Aaron offers it, and then it is sent up. Paula, what are you thinking?
So I find it interesting that it's not just matzah. It's all of these compositions. It's the composition of all the parts of our life, good and bad memories, good memories, suffering and not, that's combined and offered up together. And I think that's important too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Does this have a linkage to like communion?
I think you could very easily make that argument, Monica.
Exactly, a wafer there.
Yeah. And this wafer, though, isn't there's no transubstantiation. There's no understanding that this matzah represents something else or something physical. But as you introduced already, Monica, the matzah does represent a concept. And the matzah does represent that freedom, that transition from slavery to freedom, from being under the power of something or someone else to being under only God's, being subject only to God's power. Ed, I see you have unmuted. Do you have a comment, an answer?
Definitely no answer, but I keep flipping over to it does remind me of a ceremony in a Catholic church. And it does, as you introduced, transform Aaron from somebody to a priest. In other words, he is somehow a different person, or he has a different status as a result of taking this wafer, this piece of matzah. Yeah. I mean, I can see the mirror, which I never saw before you pointed this out.
Thank you.
Barbara. So I'm finding myself wondering, like, what is it about the matzah that would do that? And the first thought that came to my mind was faith, that we had the faith to go when we were told to go and take with us what we had, which was this bread that didn't have time to rise. And so, like, going right back to that moment of the faith in the future, and that would be the transformative potential in that faith.
So, Eric, do you have an answer as to what role matzah plays in this ritual and why unleavened bread is important? Oh, you're on mute, Eric. I would love to be able to hear you. There we are.
It reminds me of a Post-it note to remind you to do something. You know, like it tells you that we went from slavery to freedom. So it just so that reminds you on our calendar. And Judaism is a time-based religion, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. That's great. Monica.
I'm thinking also, is this kind of the way that they could be breaking bread with God? Like, when you develop a strong relationship with somebody, it happens in person. Like in business, at least in my business, relationships are everything. And breaking bread breaks the barrier between the relationship that you might have. So is this a way of Aaron breaking bread with God?
I think that that's a really interesting way of thinking about all of the sacrifices, because of course there was a daily bread offering made to God and daily animal offerings multiple times a day and daily incense offerings. So those really were, minus the incense, because of course can't recommend eating that. These are all ways of coming into such close relationship with God that we eat together. I love that. Susan Plum.
Thank you.
We have a few
I
Susans.
thought matzah may represent resiliency that Judaism and the Jewish people have. We were told to go with what we can as fast as we can, with faith, to a land of freedom, prosperity, and hope. And maybe matzah just represents resiliency, that which we took and how much it represented to us and through our journey.
That's great, Susan, thank you. Now, the last question that I had about this section of the text is about the whole week that elapses between these sacrifices and the moment of ordination, the moment that Aaron and his sons become priests, where the priesthood comes into being. Why do you think they needed a full week to make that transition, for that shift to be completed? Arden, please.
One thing that comes to mind for me is, like, thinking about this in the present day, is that, like, from what I've observed, it's really common, and I totally get why. I would probably do this if I was in the same place, for people who are, for rabbinical students and also cantorial students, to avoid saying that they're clergy as much as possible, even up to the last day, even while everyone else is passionately disagreeing. And I imagine like these priests way back when would need like a good amount of time for that to really kick in, because it takes time to really adjust one's mind to, oh, I'm in this position now. And I think that's to kind of help them get used to it first more.
Thank you. Deb saying in our Zoom chat box that it takes a week to let the weight of the commitment fully sink in. I love that. So let's move to our next text. We can't, I mean, as much as I would love to spend the whole morning on just this one text, I have brought two more for you. I wonder, Jody, do you have the text in front of you, and would you be willing to read the English of Leviticus 23, verses 5 through 8?
Yes.
Great.
In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to Adonai, and on the 15th day of that month, Adonai's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day, you shall celebrate a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall make offerings by fire to Adonai. The 7th day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations.
Thank you. So of course, this is a different ritual that's being described. This is the original celebration of Passover, the year after the flight from Egypt. There are two elements here: a Passover offering, so an offering of a paschal lamb, we will be told in subsequent verses, and you begin a feast of unleavened bread, of matzot. So Passover is what's being marked with matzah in this section. What is the role of matzah in this ritual? I might suggest that here, just as Monica suggested before, it's this reminder. It's this reminder of the freedom that came with the initial eating of unleavened bread. So returning the same food to our mouths to put that taste of freedom again in our mouths. What other interpretations do you have, Monica?
Is the time to create the ritual to sort of build to the holy moment of ordination? And is the number of days somehow related to Passover?
Interesting. Well, if you see where these verses come in the Torah, the 7 days of ordination actually precede the 7 days of Passover. This is chapter 23 as opposed to chapter 8 in the book of Leviticus. So this is later, although we are also taught that there is no before or after in Torah. Everything just is.
Right, the numbers always have meaning. That's why.
Exactly. And from Facebook, our friend Claudia on Facebook gives us the kind of the measuring stick of from one Shabbat to another, the length of creation and rest. Because of course, creation is 6 days, but creation plus rest, creation plus reflection, that's 7 days. That is wholeness. And that's what we celebrate from 1 week to the next on Shabbat. So I wonder if maybe the better question is, why is unleavened bread, why is matzah important in this moment, this marking of Passover? Deb has written in the chat box, to be willing to have simple food to exist and be thankful for what we have. both of those things absolutely are intimately tied in to the matzah itself. Exactly right. Is there anybody who wants to unmute and speak up? Oh, Paula, I see you're off mute. Do you want to comment? No, I don't want you to go back on mute, but.
Well, I like I was going to comment before on the completion of the creation as a foundation, but the matzah also, we're told to you, no matter where you appear in history, even to this very minute, are the ones that left Egypt. You were the ones that are in the desert, and I don't know what manna is or tastes like, but at least we could do matzah.
I love that you bring up manna and what it tastes like. When I used to teach teenagers out in Seattle, one of my favorite classes that I ever taught was food as midrash. So what are the stories we can build around our basic Torah text through food? And the very first week, I would have them read about manna and then make manna. It tastes a little bit like cardamom. And lots of sweet white things, if you ask the teenagers of Seattle.
Where do you get the recipe?
It's basic. I mean, it's a very, just like with all Torah, it is a very sketchy recipe. Arden thinks of it as frosted flakes. Yep, and that's basically what these kids were making. It was amazing. So, unleavened bread is what we have in this moment in Leviticus when it tells us how to celebrate Pesach, how to celebrate Passover. And it is sacrifices of animals and eating unleavened bread. And it is also a week long. So I have put my questions on our text study sheet so that you can see them all. But I wonder if anybody wants to speak either to the significance of matzah or to the bringing back of the 7 days to our Passover celebration. Susan, yeah.
It seems to me that in all of these instances, 7 days seems to mark, right, a period of transition, and a lot of people touched on this. It's the transition from regular person to an ordained person. It's the transition from slavery to freedom. It's also, I think, in the Torah, the time it takes when you go outside the camp to heal if you've been sick. So it's a time of transition, and that matzah seems to be sort of a vehicle for that transition. And that bringing that back as a ritual every year kind of reminds us that we too have to sort of make that journey of transition over those 7 days.
And Susan, I can't think of a better segue to our final text, which is only going to deepen exactly what you just introduced. Norris's, I wonder if one of you would be willing to read our final text.
Sure. Matzah, the bread of affliction, reminds us of our hurried departure from Egypt and of the simple food we ate as we made our way through the desert, covering and uncovering, lifting and lowering the matzot, helps us to understand our transformation from poor slaves to free men and women with the power to choose our own destiny. We begin and end our feast with matzot, the journey of bread.
Journey bread. And that's actually what I titled this text study, Matzah, the journey bread. I also think that journey bread would make a really good band name. So if anybody's looking, please go ahead. So
I'll keep that in mind.
Monica, yes, please. So I'm going to ask these questions in the opposite order that they're written on the text study sheet, because Susan brought us so beautifully into this first question, or the second question, which is, in what ways does matzah represent liminality or being between moments? How does matzah represent transition? Which Rabbi Sue Levi Elwell calls the journey bread. What makes matzah the journey bread? Eric, please, and let's get you unmuted.
And okay.
Here we are.
It seems, you visualize the astronauts going into space and they have to have dried food and dehydration microwaves in order to reconstitute it. So I had a visual simulation about the astronauts going to the space station and having dried food so they can preserve a longer time.
Yeah. So that the logistical question of how do you keep food good for a longer time, and the less liquid there is in it, the longer time it will last. So matzah is like space ice cream in a certain way. Eric, I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Soon.
So Deb suggesting that it is fast and easy and portable. So in that way, matzah represents transition. It's the food on the go. How else? Are there any other comment? No, Ed, great.
I wish I could remember exactly what Rabbi Rubenstein said like 2 days ago, 3 days ago. But I thought he was making the point that it's the food of the poor, the people with the least, and that that reminds us of where we came from and where we're going, even if we don't know where we're going exactly. He said it much better than I am saying.
That's his job, to say it better than any of us.
He's very good at that.
Cynthia. Cynthia wants to link the fact that matzah isn't very flavorful to transition. So the switch, the mouthfeel, the taste of bitterness into sweetness, you have to go through a moment of maybe, how would we call it, neutrality, to go from one to the other. Cynthia, do you want to, I love that idea. I wonder if you would like to, or if you'd be comfortable unmuting and saying any more about that idea.
I'm not sure if I have much more to say, but it really makes me think that as we're going towards, the promised land and the sense of a sweeter, we always need this period to transition where we're not feeling our worst, but we're not feeling our best yet either. And that it's a process, the journey. And that's why we call it journey bread as well.
Yeah.
I just want to throw in Italy, we always said that that manna tastes like gnocchi.
I love that. I would have collected that for, every single day, just with joy. Cynthia, that's really a wonderful way of thinking about the transition, about matzah as a journey bread, but also how eating matzah, how ingesting matzah helps us understand that history and that experience. Yeah, Monica, please.
Is it important that it also is easier to transport? Like it lasts longer, it doesn't mold usually, things, for a journey, something you need to last longer.
Yeah, exactly the point that Eric brought up for us. Like the space food, like astronaut food, it stays longer. It is, again, logistically just an easier thing to take with you on a journey, hence journey bread. So that kind of logistical response in combination with the more metaphorical and poetic response that Cynthia is offering, I think that helps us to understand what matzah is, what matzah does, and how it helps us interact with, using our mouths to interact with our history. I'm seeing Laura and Doron and Paula. Great.
Barbara.
Okay.
Oh,
I have a question on the Leviticus 20, the second one. Okay. On the first day, you shall celebrate a sacred occasion. I don't have to read it. You know what it says. But my interpretation of that is that there's one Seder, yet we celebrate two. Am I misinterpreting?
I don't think so. But what does that mean to you?
maybe we think it's so much more important today that we use 2 nights.
Yeah. We do celebrate 2 nights because it is so important to have a Seder during Passover, to celebrate that moment during the official celebration of the ceremony. And with diaspora, with Jews not living just in one place, in particular, not just living in Jerusalem, a place where you can hear a shofar blast around the entire city as the holiday is announced. It's like a dominoes, but a very slow moving domino of each kind of time zone taking on the responsibility of this holiday. So the second Seder was a later addition so that we would make sure that everybody celebrated Passover in the proper time. And so just in case, you do it a second day, which is why the 7-day celebration in many Jewish communities is celebrated, in fact, for 8 days, because you don't want to lose any piece of the holiday.
And it's 7 in Israel.
Yes, it is 7 in Israel because you know exactly when the holiday falls when you're there. You're all in the same time zone. It certainly helps. Yeah.
One of the things that my family decided to do for this year, instead of saying next year in Jerusalem, we're saying next year in person.
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to do. And I remember doing that last year. So it's that, maybe it's like next year in Jerusalem, which is the constant wish, but never comes true. Although, please God, let that not be true about doing this in person.
Let's not put that
true.
that way.
All right, Doron.
I was thinking something a little different. The difference in the significance of the matzah for us, thousands of years later, and for the actual generation that came out of Egypt. We talk about always remembering how we came out, and we should always remember it. And that's a very good, important thing in terms of our current perceptions. But if you think about the generation that just came out of Egypt, in a way, the last thing that they needed a reminder of is what it was like to be slaves. They were born slaves, or their parents were slaves. What was revolutionary for them was even the dream or concept of being free at one point. So perhaps if you wanted to do something dramatic for the generation of Egypt, you should give them not unleavened bread, but leavened bread and rich bread, something they had never experienced, so that they can begin to experience what freedom will mean. I mean, we're talking here in all these talks about, we always want to remember what it was like. They didn't need a reminder. That was the generation that just came out. And so perhaps that's a way of saying that what the Torah was looking at is maybe not so much the generation that left out, but many future generations that would not remember this. And as a result, like us, have to be reminded of tougher times. They certainly didn't need to, the slaves in 1866, people who were slaves in 1866 did not have to be reminded of what slavery was like.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Next is Paula, followed by Barbara, and then Eric.
So I think a little bit of the matzah as a palate cleansing. And so much of what we do in life is by route and that 7 days, you go through it and, we all grumble a little bit, but boy, doesn't pizza taste good on that 9th day, Yeah,
it's never tasted better. Because as Susan Wagner points out in our chat in the Zoom, and a couple of people, including Iris, has pointed out on the Facebook chat, that matzah is so simple. It's just flour and water, which means that in order to give it flavor, we have to do something to it. Or it also means, as Susan points out, that everyone can access those ingredients, and therefore everyone can easily observe the ritual and reenact the transition for themselves. Yeah. Barbara.
So it's very funny. My response was from something earlier, but you just brought it right back. So I'm thinking a lot about, and Rabbi Ross brought this up last night, matzah as a vehicle. So we have journey bread, but it's not, it's the journey and it's the vehicle. So literally at the table, it's the vehicle for really yummy whipped butter. for example. So, right? So,
good call.
And that's a lot of what happened, right? It's the vehicle for that toffee and dark chocolate. And so
It's transformed.
yeah. So as the vehicle, it becomes transformed, and it is transformative. So I was really interested in the journey, and then the vehicle piece and the neutrality piece. But I have a question. So what does that mean? So what does that mean as a symbol, as a deeper metaphor, this vehicle that brings something more, but in itself is so simple, like you said, like everyone has the ingredients. I think that's so rich for contemplation.
I think we could spend the next hour talking about just that question. I mean, genuinely. But of course, as Aaron and his sons raised that matzah to God, it was maybe the blank slate. It was maybe that, here is the offering of our heart, the avodah shebalev, what we each can bring and can offer, can, just like matzah pizza ingredients, or just like that whipped butter, or whatever it is you put on top of your matzah, that what we put on top of that matzah when we offer it to God, when we break that bread, Monica, with God, we get to offer whatever it is that we are bringing in that moment. So Barbara, I love the question that you just raised. Eric, and then I see Freddie.
Oh, the Rabbi Zimmerman many years ago says the Passover table represents the altar in the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And it stuck with me, because then we were scattered among the nations. So this is our connection with the Jewish people celebrating Pesach.
Yeah, and it's yet that whole table, Eric, exactly as you are saying in the name of Rabbi Zimmerman, that table is another way to connect us to our past and to our story and to our history. It doesn't matter whether your family has been Jewish for generations, or if you have been Jewish for a day, or your Jewish soul is in the process of transforming. This is all of our history. It is equally all of ours. And that Pesach table and the eating of matzah links us to it every single year. So Freddie, I see that you had a comment, and then I think we'll go back to our service.
God bless Rabbi Zimmerman.
Thank you, Eric.
I was just thinking when Barbara was talking about the vehicle, that the very simple matzah, just the flour and the water, really just holds the whole story. And the idea that you can put the whipped butter, or you can put the chocolate and marshmallows or whatever, that each person can put their own interpretation and their own idea of what freedom is, and bring to that story, or gather from that story what they will as they retell it and retell it. And I think what Doran was saying about the future generations, I think that's that retelling, that vehicle gets different toppings depending on where we are at the moment.
Yes, exactly. And on that note, I think that we have had our morning with matzah before our evening of matzah. Thank you so much, everybody who brought their incredible thoughts here in our Zoom room and in our Facebook chat. Before we conclude our service, we turn our thoughts to those we love who are in need of our help, whether they are in need of comfort, of physical healing, of emotional or spiritual healing. We raise our voices together to bring these prayers to them and bring this comfort and strength to them. If you are thinking of anybody who is in need of healing prayers, I invite you to share their name either in our Zoom room chat or in our Facebook chat. And if you are on neither platform, I invite you to share their name aloud. We feel their names, we feel their presence, so that we can join our voices together in our prayer for healing, Misha Beirach.
Misha Avotenu Mikol Habracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mikol Habracha Lavoitenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We continue together with the words of V'hashevota within our Aleinu prayer as we rise together as a community. V'hashevota
Elevavecha
Ki Adonai Hu HaElohim V'nema v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad ushemo echad.
Our thoughts turn to those whose lives have touched our own, who are no longer with us, but are always with us in our hearts. This week, the Central Synagogue community marks the recent passing in the last 30 days of Alan Bork, Theodore Cohn, Gerald Fengel, Harav Meir Isser ben Shlomo V'chaya Halevi, Miriam Levy, Barbara Linhart, Edith Cohen-Lippin, Ronald Shimeen, Miriam Schaefer, Arlene Katisker-Westreich, Renee Weiss, and Barry Wolin. If you are marking the recent passing of a loved one in the last 7 days, if you're observing Shiva, or in the last month, if you're still in the period of Shloshim, whether you are on screen with us or at home, I suppose we're all at home, I invite you to rise and share the name of your loved one in the chat, or if you're in our Zoom room, share the name aloud with our community. If you are marking a yahrzeit, or if you are in the first year of mourning, if you are in Shana of a loved one, I invite you to rise and share the name of your loved one.
Marty Ballot, my dad.
My sister Beverly Johnson.
And if this week marks a yahrzeit, the anniversary of a death of a loved one, I invite you to rise, again, if you are able, to share their name with our community.
My dad, Hyman Berger.
And now, if we are able, we rise as one community and speak the words of Kaddish Yatom, our mourner's Kaddish. The words are on page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah, v'alma divarach v'rutei v'yamlich malchutei. Mechayechon yomechon v'chayei b'chol Beit Yisrael. V'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mivarach le'olam lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar v'yit aleh v'yit halal. Shemei dekudasha b'richu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
May their memories be a source of peace and comfort to all of you, and we say, Amen.
Amen.
And we join together in the commandment to keep Shabbat. Oti leolam, oti leolam, v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Shavat vayinafash v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. And we join in the Kiddush together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
And for the last time before Passover, we are joining together in the blessing over the challah. Ed, raise that challah high because I do not have one. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'tehavon.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been wonderful, wonderful being here with you. There are many more opportunities to be together over the next week, including this evening, the Congregational Central Seder, which begins at 6 p.m. And if you are a member and are joining us in our Zoom room, I can't wait to see your face. And if you are joining us through any of our other platforms, through Facebook, through our live stream, or on WABC's own website, I look forward to being with you there as well. Tomorrow morning, there is a festival morning service with cantorial intern Jenna McMillan and rabbinic intern Chelsea Fuchs. Jenna, what time is that service?
That is beginning at 9:30 a.m., just like Mishkan.
Great. 24 hours. And next Saturday, our next Mishkan service, our next Shabbat morning service will actually be our Pesach Yizkor service. So many, many more opportunities for us to be together and mark this time of year. Chag Pesach Sameach, a Zissin Pesach, a sweet Pesach to everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shalom.
At the Scottish holiday.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.